This weekend, Umebura SP10 will be going down in Japan, and currently it is predicted to be tiered as an S+ tournament, a super major. It's also taking place at the same time as Luminosity Makes Big Moves 2024, which is currently predicted to be tiered as an S tier tournament. If you're wondering why I'm saying predicted, that's because the 2023 rankings haven't been released yet, so no one is exactly sure how the 2024 tournaments will be tiered until they do. That being said, we've got a pretty good idea and can reasonably guess just going off of the 2023 mid-year rankings, and it's unlikely to change much with the end of the 2023 rankings. Today and tomorrow, we'll be doing pre-tournament analyses for both Umebura SP10 and LMBM 2024. Today, we'll be focusing on Umebura, the Japanese side of this two-sided coin, and while this does mean that there will be nearly every notable Japanese player there, Umebura SP10 also features a lot of overseas competitors coming over to Japan for the first time from places like America and France. Today, as we normally do in these types of videos, we'll be going over the top 8 seeds and then moving into threats just beneath the top 8, and then to finish the video off, I want to go over something special, going over nearly every overseas player attending Umebura SP10, at the very least briefly mentioning all of them. Just a reminder before we begin that if you want to support me monetarily, you can do so by using the links to my Patreon or channel memberships in the description below. With that out of the way, let's get started by taking a look at our top 8 seeds. Credit for these seeding graphics goes to DarkNutStat. Their Twitter is linked in the description below. The first seed of Umebura SP10 is Akola, the #1 in the world on the 2023 mid-year rankings, as well as the champion of the previous iteration of Umebura. The second seed is Miya, the Game & Watch prodigy himself. The reason I bring up Miya now is because a lot of people will likely insist that Miya should be the first seed and that Akola should be the second seed. But I want to go ahead and point out that seeding has higher priorities than just being a prediction of who should place where. It's also meant to avoid conflicts between regions as well as avoid matchups that we see often at majors. And just like with Canada, it's important to remember that all of Japan isn't just one region, with places like Kanto and Kansai and Osaka all being different places. But honestly, the main thing about seeding is that when you get this high up, the first and second seeds, it really doesn't matter that much. Akola also probably has the first seed because of the legacy of him winning the previous tournament, which is a factor that a lot of people seem to forget when they look at seeding. Whoever won the previous iteration is usually seeded pretty dang high, if not at first. So yeah, Akola is the first seed and Miya is the second. Anyone and their mothers probably could have told you that Miya and Akola were the top 2 seeds, no matter what the order was. But what about the other top 8 seeds? Well, they're mostly other Japanese players, but there are 2 notable exceptions. The third seed of the tournament is Gluttony, and the 5th is Zamba, the 2 highest seeded international competitors. My wild predictions for these 2 players is that both of them are either going to overperform or wildly underperform. Gluto can keep up with Miya and Akola, proven by their close sets at tournaments like Rise and Grind 2023 and Watch the Throne, and Gluttony is probably the best player in Smash at having the clutch factor, especially when it matters. I won't be surprised if Gluttony takes the entire tournament, but here's the thing. Gluttony's bracket has one very important factor. In order to make top 8 from winners, like he's seeded to, Gluttony has to defeat T, who Gluto does not have a good record against. While Gluto has finally defeated T recently, T still remains a big bracket demon for Gluttony, and if the 2 of them do end up fighting on T's home turf instead of on Gluto's home turf, there's no telling how dominant that set could be for T. As far as Zamba goes, the main problem in his way is Miya, as Zamba has proven time and time again to simply be lost versus Mr. Game & Watch. However, there's another big issue for Zamba. In order to make top 8 from loser's side, like Zamba is seeded to, he has to defeat Kameme. Now, if you didn't know, Sora is considered to be really bad for Rob. Now, there is definitely a chance that Kameme doesn't make it to Zamba, but if this set does end up happening, I don't think the odds are very good for Zamba. Again, both of the top seeds from other countries have really hard brackets to make top 8, but I think that if they do, they have a strong potential to outperform their seeds. The 4th seed of the event is Yoshidora, who is seeded to beat Zamba to make it into top 8 from winners. I'm not entirely sure if this set will end in a Yoshidora victory, however, and Yoshidora is definitely the top 8 seed with the least amount of recent results to draw from. Rounding out the rest of our top 8 seeds is T, the 6th seed, Zachary, the 7th seed, and Ashimo, the 8th seed. I definitely think these seeds are bound to be the most controversial. T's seed at least makes sense given his 2nd place finish at the last Umebura, but both Zachary and Ashimo are in slight slumps lately, and many would argue that Shuton, Kameme, or Ken, who are seeded beneath them, should have those top 8 seeds. In order to make it through top 8 in losers, which all of them are seeded to do, Ashimo has to defeat Yara, which is certainly up in the air given Yara's recent good placements. Additionally, T has to defeat Shuton and Zachary has to defeat Ken. Personally, and I'm just gonna come out and say it, I don't think either of these sets will happen as seeded, as I think Shuton would beat T and Ken would beat Zachary. That about wraps it up for our top 8 seeds though, and I think that several of them won't actually make top 8, but honestly, it's a Japanese major. What do you expect? Half of the sets that I've talked about probably won't even happen, and there's probably going to be some player that no one's ever heard of before making the top 8 randomly. That's just the Japanese way after all. But now that we've done that, it's time to go over some players seated just below the top 8 that I think have a great chance to make a big run. Like I mentioned earlier, the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th seeds are Shuton, Kameme, Yara, and Ken. And not only do I think these players have huge potential to make top 8, I've already gone over how I think that a few, if not all 4 players will actually end up making top 8. Seeds 13 through 16 also contain some great threats to make top 8, like Hero and Kananabe, who we haven't seen at a tournament this size since Port Priority 8. There's also Apollo Kage, who said that he feels like he was overseeded, and honestly, if anything, that means he'll probably make top 8. Now lastly, there are a few players I wanted to point out headed into the tournament. Firstly, level 1 is the 18th seed, maybe the highest seed of any Toon Link at a Super Major in Ultimate's lifespan. It'll be really interesting to see if level 1 can make a decent shot to top 8. Next player is Doramigi, who I always want to see do well as a Minmin main. Raflo will also be attending, and at Terra, Raflo actually got a big upset over Yoshidora, so Raflo does have good potential to do really well here. Omowatsu is attending his first ever major ever since he returned to competing last year. If you weren't aware, Omowatsu had some drama with Umeki and retired for a while, but ever since Omowatsu and Umeki made up, he started to compete again. I made an entire YouTube short about it if you're interested in the finer details. Either way, this will be Omowatsu's first major back, and I'm really interested to see if he's at the same level he was back in his heyday. And lastly, I want to highlight the players that I've made dedicated videos to before, going from the highest seed to the lowest. Firstly, we have Tsubaki, who was the first player I ever made a dedicated video about, and even though I've already went over him, I've also made a video specifically about level 1 as well. Additionally, we have Roki, known as the Isabel that could, as well as Senra, who destroyed opponents backed by heavy metal at Toyota Grand Slam 16. And of course, we have Toriguri, the best banjo in the world who I made a documentary on. Now that we've gone over the top 8 upset threats, I want to go over something a bit more special. There are a lot of overseas competitors attending Umebura SP10, so I want to go over every single one of them, sorting them by country. Without further ado, let's get into it. This is a graphic released by Darknut Stats showing the seeding of every non-Japanese player at Umebura. We'll start by looking at players from the United States, going from the top seed to the lowest. Firstly, we have Zamba, the 5th seed, who we've already gone over and is probably going to be the best performing American at Umebura unless he gets upset early, which is definitely possible. Next up is Apollo Kage, the 15th seed, who could maybe make top 8 as long as he can make an upset or two. Next up, we have the pair of Base Mage, the 25th seed, and Jackal, the 29th seed. I actually think Jackal has a really strong potential to go pretty far, partly because Wolf is a more uncommon character over in Japan. And next up, we have Cosmos, the 48th seed, and Void, the 65th seed, both of whom probably aren't going to be making runs to top 8. Cosmos has been to Japan before though, and did pretty decently. And lastly, we have the 166th seed, who is a Minmin player named Oni-chan, oh wow. I really don't have anything else to say about this player other than saying I'm sorry for what I just did to you all. The next most populous country at Umebura is France, who is seemingly coming out in droves. Obviously, we have the 3rd seed, Gluttony, but other than that, we've got the 23rd seed, Raflo, who I also mentioned earlier. The next highest French seed is Natoru, the 45th seed, who has a really good potential to go far in bracket. The next two highest French seeds are Spectral, the 78th seed, and Alltech, the 101st seed. The next two are Homika, the 130th seed, and Artsniff, the 134th. Notably, Homika has been doing pretty well at some Japanese locals leading up to Umebura. Next up is Susu, the 161st seed, and Enki, the 180th. I actually think Enki could make a few upsets, as Pikachu is an extremely rare character over in Japan. Next, we have the 411th seed Shido and the 413th seed Asna. And the last two French competitors are the 514th seed TBN and lastly the 557th seed Satori. The next country with the most representatives is Canada, who has a total of 5 players going. The highest seed of them is the 21st seed Ouch, and everything I said about Jackal applies here as well, just with a slightly higher seed. The next few Canadians are Captain L, the 113th seed, and Samuel, the 146th, who is the TO for Battle of BC. And the last two Canadians at Umebura are DK Bill, the 150th seed, and lastly we have Yu, the 517th seed. The next country might actually surprise you, as it's a country that is very underrated within the international Smash scene. That country is South Korea, which has 4 players traveling to Japan for Umebura. The highest two seeding-wise are Linzel, the 210th seed, and Tanark, the 227th. The other two competitors are Jarong, the 241st seed, and LMA, the 528th seed, who doesn't have a listed character. And now, for the last 3 countries represented here at Umebura, they all have only one competitor appearing. Those countries are Iceland, American Samoa, and Taiwan. Iceland has Igiru, the 414th seed, American Samoa has Y6, the 422nd seed, and lastly Taiwan has 404, the 538th seed. And lastly, while they're not listed on the graphic, Ashen is supposed to be going. I think they're not here since they're technically Japanese but compete in South Korea. I could be wrong about that though, and it could have just been a mistake. And the final player is Kinaji, who is from Australia and should be going to this tournament as well. I think they weren't listed on this graphic either because it was just a simple mistake or because they've been in Japan for a hot minute. But that about wraps it up for today. Umebura SP10 is going to be the largest event of the weekend, and it'll start 2024 off with a bang. However, keep one thing in mind. At the end of the day, this is a Japanese major. That means lots of upsets will happen, and the seeding is likely going to fall apart faster than a Lego set being dropped down a flight of stairs. No matter what happens though, I'll be here to cover all of it when I release my video on Umebura SP10. If you're excited for that, be sure to subscribe to not miss any of the action. That's going to be it for today's video. Before I go, shout out goes to my patrons Seth Laster, Fosco333, Logan S, as well as my tier 2 members Iltis and Diamond Blaze. Additionally, shout out my YouTube members Stormtrooper, Locosoko, Diarrhea, Dcho Jr., Defective, Orangabang, Fan of, Boston R, and Iltis, again, as well as my tier 2 members Mike G and Wu-Tang Forever. Lastly, extra special shout out goes to my tier 3 patron Ocean Man, who says RisterMice is sorry for playing Min Min. If you want to support me using any of these methods, links are in the description below. Tomorrow, I'll be releasing my pre-tourney analysis of Luminosity Makes Big Moves 2024, but until then, I've been RisterMice, and thank you all so very much for watching.